Hello. So this isn't going to be a video about Estonia or anything like that. It's going to be a little bit of a departure. So a topic that I've really been thinking about recently. It's something. It's a an interest of mine and something I'm very much. It's been a part of my intellectual life for a very long time, and that's the history and the literary history and the cultural history of Romanticism, of the Romantic movement in art. Particularly in Europe, but also in the United States, and I believe in other parts of the world as well. You might make an argument that there's a tradition or a legacy of Romanticism all over the world. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that and why I think it's a very important and very relevant topic, because I know that a lot of people are probably thinking that Romanticism, well, it's a bunch of dead old white men, so therefore it's irrelevant, or it doesn't have anything to say about our time. And I think there's nothing that could be more false. So I just wanted to lay out some of the, what I believe are some of the uh, legacies of Romanticism and how they affect our daily lives, or not our daily lives, but our political culture and the culture in which we live, especially here in the West. The first one that I think is really obvious now, if you see it all across Europe, in the United States, is the romantic uh, idea of nationalism and nation and a people. Um, Now, if we think about the 19th century, this was really the first. This was really the age of. We think of it in Europe at least, and also in other parts of the world, especially Latin America and the New World. It is the age of nationalism, um, and in particular, we can talk about different variations in which this took place. For example, civic nationalism or ethnic nationalism. But I want to talk a little bit, especially um, about ethnic nationalism and about that tradition, because I believe that's a tradition that's kind of coming back. Um, so if you look at the parties in Europe and also here in the United States, or I should say, not here in the United States, I'm in Estonia, you see that there is an idea that seems to be reasserting itself that it's not simply belonging to a nation. It's not simply a matter of principles, of believing principles, or pledging allegiance to a constitution. There's a cultural element, at the very least, to belonging to a nation. That there is uh, at the very least, a cultural element, and sometimes it's implied there's an ethnic or racial element to living in a nation. And that's a very much rooted in the Romantic idea, the 19th century Romantic idea of what a nation is. That a people, there's a commonality and a loyalty um, that exists among a people, not simply a state. Um, that there's a people that share a common language and a common culture, um, and that you can have something in common with someone whom you have never met before. This was Benedict Anderson's thesis in um, uh, uh, what's that favorite title? I'm drawing a blank now for the title. It's Imagined Communities, and this was his thesis. You could share something like a language, a common experience with someone that you've never met before, completely different sort of community. Um, and of course, it's not a coincidence, I think, that the rise of national consciousness also comes at a point of rupture, or what is perceived as a point of rupture. And this is a big, how do you say, trope that people talk about when they talk about modernity. Modernity is a time of rupture. So it's a time of when people have moved from the countryside to the city, and there's a rapid change in lifestyle, a rapid change in culture, in literary culture, and in literacy. Um, so I think that's the most evident that you see, kind of like in politics today, is the rise of reemergence, I should say, of sort of ethnic-based nationalism. Now, the second element that I think is also very prominent in our culture, especially in popular culture and just in general, is that the idea that of the idea of difference as being and cultural subversion as having sort of a cultural or artistic value. This is very much a romantic concept. If you think about people who sort of scandalous lives, a lot of romantic writers, or how Romanticism oftentimes will valorize, for example, a bandit or a pirate or someone on the margins of society. Um, uh, other, other romantic writers like Byron, he lived a life that was very much, how do you say, uh, uh, kind of an act itself, like a performance act of sort of subverting the dominant values of that time. And you see this very often, especially in the political left wing, the idea that there's some content to difference. There's some content to um, subverting the values. Again, this isn't something that postmodernists came up with. It's not something that the 68ers came up with. This is something that goes all the way back to Romanticism, and it's very prominent in our culture. Um, another element of Romanticism that I think is very much a part of our culture is that um, we tend to think um, of it tends to inform our way we think of subjective and objective experience. For example, in something like a poem that's an ode, a lot of times a writer will take a look, for example, at a scene in nature um, or or something that's happening in the external world, and that will cause a reflection um, and sort of an inward process and that will play out within the poem. So there's this coherence or this ability. There's this kind of effort to make the internal world, the self, cohere towards objective reality. Um, Harold Bloom, the scholar, wrote very eloquently about this. He believes that in Romanticism, the epic goes from being not just an epic of the external world where the hero, how do you say, undertakes a path to try to, for example, in the Odyssey, return home or something like that, or go or takes this adventure to achieve whatever end. That epic becomes internalized. It becomes about um, the poet's own struggle or the artist's own struggle for recognition, or their struggle to attain artistic credibility. Um, and that's also something that's very modern. The idea that the art itself becomes its own subject. Again, we think of that as a very kind of like 20th century idea, but again, I believe that it's something that has its roots in the Romantic period. As I said before, I would like to maybe talk more about this in another time. Um, but it's again, I think that Romanticism is something that just permeates our culture, and it's something that we can't really. I mean, especially our popular culture is so imbued with it that it's almost in our cultural subconscious. I think. So I would like to talk about this more. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any comments, please leave them below. Tell me what you think.